My Wendigo encounter. This story takes place in the backcountry of the area I grew up in. Be warned, some of this may be frightening for some. To start it off, my name is James and I am now 28 years old and living in Texas. Anyways, here's my story. So back in 2019, I remember there being a big uproar of unknown creatures roaming the forest, like Bigfoot and skinwalkers. But this story isn't about them. This story is about probably one of the scariest things I've ever heard about. The Wendigo. A few months after one of my friends, Jacob, mentioned this big uproar, I went to go see him. Since I had been away, enlisted in the United States Marines. I got back after being discharged, and one of the first things I did was to go and see him. We were having a good old time, and he brought up the idea of going out to a little hangout spot his now ex-girlfriend took him to when they wanted to get away for a few hours. So I decided why not. I grabbed my gun and we went out to this extremely secluded area and started messing around on the old dock that was there. It had been pretty much forgotten by the looks of it, poorly maintained, and some of the boards were almost completely rotted through. So about 30 minutes into our shenanigans, Jacob brought up the topic of the Wendigo. The name sounded a little scary, even for me. Curious, I asked him about it. He said if you went into the woods and said Wendigo 3 times, you would come across the scariest looking thing you had ever seen. Me, calling his bluff, told him to prove it. To this day, I wish I hadn't. We started walking on this little path that led deep into the thick woods, close to the Alabama state line. We walked for maybe 20-ish minutes and decided we were in a good spot. I feel like it's worth knowing that it had been raining a lot over the past couple of days, so the ground was completely saturated with water. I turned to Jacob and he dared me to do it. I stood there, in complete silence. The rest of the forest was almost silent as well, besides the tall pines swaying in the wind high above our heads. Reluctantly, I started to say it. Wendigo, Wendigo, Wendigo. Then, nothing happened. I let out a sigh of relief at the fact that nothing had happened. One of the things about mine and Jacob's friendship is that we love to prove another wrong. In our friendship of 10 years, I think it was the first time I'd ever proven him wrong at anything. We started to talk a little bit of shit back and forth at each other when we heard a noise in the distance. Me, still having the reflexes I had from the Marines, immediately snapped towards the direction of the noise that were soon turning into noises. I started to move closer to the noises, and then shortly after, we saw a few coyotes running across the path about 30 feet in front of us. I breathed another sigh of relief, but that relief did not last long. I knew something was up, I just didn't know what was. All I knew was it was time for me and Jacob to leave. As we turned to leave the woods, all of a sudden, a tall pine tree started to groan and creak as it started to come down. Noticing this, and in a moment of pure instinct, I shoved Jacob forwards as the tree came falling through the rest of the branches and landed right between us. Jacob let out a cry of terror as the tree landed, and I hopped over the tree to get to him. I could feel his heart pounding like a drum as I grabbed him by his shirt and yanked him to his feet. He was still terrified and practically crying as I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Move, Jacob! Fucking move now!" I spun him around really hard, causing him to fall to his knees. I got him up and we both started to sprint down the path and toward the direction we came. I didn't dare look back, and neither did Jacob. I was sprinting through the woods when a familiar sound came from behind me. "Jacob! Jacob, come quick!" It was the sound of Jacob's younger sister, Olivia. He turned and tried to get past me, the whole time screaming, "Olivia!" I stopped him and said, "Jacob, look at me. It's not her. Do you hear me? It's not her." Just then, another pine tree started to buckle. I saw it just in time to tackle Jacob down to the ground, and both of us were nearly crushed. I screamed at Jacob once more, "Go! Get out of here! Go now!" As I was screaming, I pulled my gun out of my waistband and aimed it down the trail in the direction of where we came. Jacob made it to the opening of the trail and turned back and noticed I was still aiming my gun down the trail. "Bradley, get out of there! Come on, hurry!" I turned and started sprinting towards him. As I made it into the clearing a good 50 feet, I turned, and that's when me and Jacob both saw it. The thing we had ushered into showing itself. The Wendigo. It stood about 9 feet tall on its hind legs. There was practically no meat on its bone. It had really skinny legs and even skinnier arms. Its skin a pale white, almost like a vampire's, but the thing I noticed most about it were its eyes, a vibrant blue, almost like a lightsaber. Having had enough fear, I raised my gun and fired it at the Wendigo. Jacob, not sticking around to see if I had killed it, turned and ran towards the car. I turned and did the same as he passed me by. That was my first experience with this so-called Wendigo, and I pray almost every night that I never have to encounter something that terrifying again. I'm a filmmaker by profession. For this one project, a horror short film, I, along with fellow team members, were at this location in Diwali. This location was, however, provided to us by our producer, which I liked. I loved it, in fact. It was the closest to what I had in mind for my film. Outside, it had a lot of open area covered in bushes. It was just alongside the main road. From the gate, we would walk 150 meters through the bushes to reach the house. The bungalow had an eerie vibe. The whole house was empty. All we could hear was the crickets chirping. It was around 9 p.m. in the winter last year. All of us had gathered around to get the remaining work done. I was mostly supervising. Amit was doing the storyboards. Shamim was sketching the designs accordingly. Rahul was sitting by the wall, busy on his phone. Rahul and I don't believe in any supernatural power. In fact, he was watching some ghost videos on YouTube. We were all sitting in a big hall with the main door open. We could easily see the road through the door. There was no electricity. All the production equipments were provided to us in advance, as we were about to shoot in the next 3 days. We had batteries and production lights. However, we were only using one of the lights. We were waiting for Anurag, a teenager friend of Shamim, who wanted to assist us in the project. He was supposed to be there in half an hour, and we were chilling and working. The mood was light and creative. We also had a bottle of old rum, a few packets of cigarettes, so a light booze was along the way. Not for me, though. I didn't feel like it. So around 9:15, Anurag arrived and rushed inside, creeped out. He shook hands with all of us, kind of in awe. We offered him a fruity. Later, he sat with Amit and helped him with the sketching. He curiously said to me, "Can I also read the script?" I smiled and handed over a copy of the script to him. Why not? For the next 15 minutes, he went through it thoroughly and kept looking up and smiling. He joined Amit again. A few minutes later, he reluctantly asked, "Why did you choose this place to shoot? Couldn't you find any other place?" "Why?" I responded. "Are you scared of this place?" He looked so from the beginning. He told us that he had told his parents that he was going to one of his friends. They wouldn't have allowed him to come over to this place. We asked the reason, and he pointed towards the side of the main gate and told us that 3 kids had died here because of some accidental fire during the British rule. This house belonged to some high-ranked British officer. The kids were his children. Many people hear their voices every now and again. They hear kids cry in pain. Many passers have also claimed to see a girl child about 8 to 10 years old standing on the gate, crying for help. Yes, she is white, dressed in a green frock. This shook the hell out of Shamin and Amit. Rula and I were still skeptical, but Amit was panicking the most. He demanded that we leave now and look for another location, and Shamin joined him. Anurag looked at all the activities silently. All of us were from Mumbai. We had to look for a hotel if I left. So, with immense persuasion, we convinced them to stay for the night. We decided to keep working, and now with the music on. If anything were to happen, it would have happened by now. Rahul and I assured them that nothing is going to happen, and that we will leave in the morning, unharmed and cheerful. For the next few hours, Rahul had managed to get the mood lighter with his witty jokes. No one looked out the door. At 1:30, we decided to prepare our beds and take rest. We left the LED panel light on, opened our beddings, and laid down. We talked for a few minutes more, and then everyone fell asleep, one by one. I decided to stay awake a little longer to chat with my girlfriend. We were all facing the door, which we had left a little bit open due to the odor this place had. By now, all I could hear was the snores and crickets chirping. I was engrossed in chatting, so much so that I didn't pay attention to the chirps that had gone silent. It was a sudden click. Everything was now silent and calm, but I continued chatting as it was more interesting. Then, from the corner of my eyes, I saw a figure standing and peeping through the door at me. I looked at it, and it was inside. A girl about 8 to 10 in a green frock, whose face was not visible due to the insufficient light. But it looked at me. I was stunned. I moved my head in slow motion and looked at the phone. I gathered all the courage I had to look up at it again. She was closer, right across my feet. My eyes welled up out of fear, but that wasn't it. I saw 2 more figures peeping at me through the open door. I again slowly looked at my phone and typed, "I'm dead today." The text didn't go through as the network was out. There was already network issues in this place. I could sense that the other figures had also entered the room, so I decided to turn away. I did, very slowly, locked my phone and closed my eyes. But suddenly, I felt that my blanket was being pulled down slowly. In an intact position, I grabbed it and pulled it back up, while breathing deeply, my eyes pouring. I didn't realize when I fell asleep. The next morning, I called my producer and told him that this place was inappropriate and that the team is not comfortable shooting here. He was furious, but soon agreed. We loaded the equipment and rented an SUV and drove off. As we drove out and got on the road, I looked back at the house. 3 children, standing in the corridor, stared at me with disappointment. I guess only I could see them, because Amit too was looking in the same direction and did not react. I never spoke about the experience to anyone. I saw them, but I was unharmed. I somewhat felt guilty about not being able to talk to those kids. I never knew that I could be scared too. I quit the project and swore to not work on another horror project, ever again. I've been experiencing unexplainable phenomena ever since I can remember. I want to engage with opinions from different backgrounds about my experiences. I'll skip to the experience itself. I'm about 10 at the time of experiencing this. I grew up with grandparents in rural Mymensingh. Theirs was a tin shed house about 100 meters away from a vehicle-worthy road. The earthen path that connected my grandparents' house to that road wound around a deep pond and went through a bamboo bush. In November of 2011, we were visiting my grandparents. My father had taken me to the bazaar in the evening to buy some groceries, and then sent me back with them and told me to come back with some money because he wanted to gamble with his old friends. While going back to the house with groceries, I heard a sound in the water as I passed by the pond. It was a splash, but a quiet and oddly drawn-out one. I stopped to see what was making that noise. There was a half moon in the sky, but the shadows of the bamboo bush fell onto the pond, obscuring my view. The water rippled and lapped. Whatever had entered the water seemed to move quietly. After straining my eyes for a bit, but able to discern nothing, I concluded that it was some kind of animal and moved on. The wind picked up while I was at my grandparents' house, and when I was going back to my father with the gambling money, the bamboo bushes were too loud for me to hear anything of what was going on at the pond. I stayed with my father and his friends for about an hour before starting my way towards my grandparents' house again. The moon had lowered in the sky now, the shadows had lengthened, and I had to focus fully on the path before me as I walked. So I had not looked up at the pond until I heard someone stepping on water. I looked towards the source of the sound, and there she was. A woman sat cross-legged above the water, her skin white, pearl white I think, and seemed to exude a pale white glow, somehow like moonlight, but there was no way the moonlight reached her at where she sat on the pond. Her hair, somehow darker than the shadows in the background, flowed weightlessly in the air. Her whole being seemed to be floating weightlessly above the water, bobbing up and down slightly. I thought her eyes were closed, but when I looked at them, I realized they were just the same white as her skin, and they were trained on me. So I ran. There wasn't anything in my hand, and by some miracle, I didn't stumble and fall even once. I ran all the way to my grandparents' house, crying and stuff. They asked me what happened, and after some deliberation, I told them I saw a snake. As a 10-year-old, I was a bit too embarrassed to say I saw a nude female ghost. I was laughed at for being scared of snakes anyway. Maybe I should have just told them what I saw. My father came back around midnight, and he seemed to not see anything. My grandpa died in 2020, and afterwards my grandma decided to drain the pond and fill it up. They found an old lock with someone's hair tied to it at the spot that I saw her. Maybe that's related. Anyway, that's my experience. What do you think of it? Have you experienced or heard of something similar? I'm excited to see how you interpret what happened. Hey everyone. I kinda stepped away from the paranormal for a while when my dad's cancer came back. That's the reason I'm writing this, to share the experiences I've had during and after the dying process. For anyone that's been next to a loved one that was dying, they may agree that many strange occurrences happen. In February of 2021, my dad went in to have his vocal cords removed due to cancer. The operation was successful. Things were tough due to communication issues, but he was alive and seemed to be healthier than ever. That is all that matters. Unfortunately, that following November when he went to get his second follow-up on biopsy, they found that his cancer had spread to his right kidney and in the course of 3 months had progressed to stage 4. On the night of June 17, 2022, my mom texted me that my dad had said he was going. I rushed over. He held on for 7 more days. During those days, the atmosphere felt so heavy. Even while alone, it always felt like you were in a crowded room. You'd hear someone pacing the hallway when everyone at the house was in my father's room. You'd hear faint conversations when no one was talking. Doors would be open after you know you had just closed them. One night, we were all with my dad sharing memories and joking around to keep the mood as light as you can in such a situation. The basic stuff. I was leaning against my mom's dresser when I felt something hit me lightly on the side of my bicep. I looked around me to find what it was, but there was nothing. So I asked if someone threw something at me. No one said they did. The best way to describe what it felt like was if someone took a balled up piece of paper and played with it until it was very soft and tossed it at you. After discussing it, we all seemed to realize at the same time that my grandmother used to playfully punch me in that same spot. It gave me both chills and joy at the thought of her saying hey. Another encounter happened to my younger sister. She was in her room when she suddenly smelled burning sage and then sweet grass. Then she heard a man say something. She immediately recognized the voice belonging to my dad's friend that was passed suddenly many years ago. Throughout that week, many of us on different occasions saw a shadow figure that would peek its head around the threshold of my dad's bedroom door. It didn't have the shape of anyone any of us recognized, so no one could really agree on who it was or what it was. A friend of my sister believed it was something malevolent, but I didn't and still do not think so. During this time, we were able to communicate with Dad through yes and no questions. We'd ask if a person that we knew who had passed was there, and he would nod or shake his head accordingly. We gathered through this that both my grandparents and 3 family friends that had passed were there, but also someone he didn't know, but said wasn't a threat. That's why I believe this figure was a guide from the other side. On June 24, 2022, at 10:45 a.m., my dad took his final breath. He was 70 years old. The moment he left, all the heaviness that had been there all week seemed to also leave, but the experience stayed and took on a new feeling. About an hour and a half after he had passed, I was outside with my sister, our cousin, and my sister's friend when we heard a car door shut. This particular door shutting can't be mistaken. It was the driver's side door of my dad's 1968 Chevy C10 pickup truck. It had belonged to my grandfather before he had passed. My dad loved this truck. It had been sitting, not running, for a long time. Just days before my dad died, my nephew decided to get it running again and gave it a wash. We think that my dad was taking one last look. A few nights after, another of our friends was walking to the kitchen when he suddenly heard a voice say his name behind him. He's not really a believer, but he insists the voice he heard was Dad's. On another night, I was sitting on the back steps as he was standing in front of me talking when he jumps and says that he just glanced at the screen door and saw my dad's silhouette standing there. Fast forward a couple of months, things had got bad financially and I had to move back into my parents' house. My mom doesn't sleep in the bedroom anymore, so I moved into it. Same room, bed that my dad passed in. On occasion, when I'm trying to get to sleep, I feel someone lay next to me in the same spot that my dad had laid. Sometimes I feel someone grab my big toe and yank it, something my dad used to always do. One day, I went to pick up my phone, and as I pulled it towards me, it felt like someone tried to pull it out of my hand. It didn't feel aggressive, and in that instant, I had a mental image of my dad grinning. It took me a few months to finally feel something after his passing. After he had passed, I didn't feel. I was numb. I didn't cry or anything. Then, one day, it hit me in full force. But it wasn't sadness that overcame me. It was anger. It was hatred. I'm not a hateful person, but in that moment, I hated all the doctors and nurses that had worked with my dad. I hated their lies that he would be alright. I hated them for not stopping the cancer like they had promised. I hated God for allowing this. And as bad as it sounds, I hated my dad simply because he had died. I wanted so badly to punch him square in the jaw, to cuss him out for not stop smoking when we had told him for 18 years. I remember looking at a picture of him and just yelling, "Fuck you, you stupid sob, fuck you," just yelling "F you" over and over until finally the tears came and I cried myself to sleep. It was around 3 a.m. when I woke up to someone walking around my room. I hear the steps walk to one side and what sounded like someone going through things. Then the steps would walk to the other side of the room and again, things being gone through. I had a fish tank that I kept the light on at night, so I could see I was alone. So I sit up and mutter, "What the hell?" Then, as clearly as day, I heard my dad's voice say, "It's me, bud. It's okay to be angry," followed by something I couldn't make out. A few nights ago, it cooled down outside to 68 degrees, so I decided to go out and walk around the property. I didn't know why, but I grabbed my spirit talker, those little boxes that displays a word and a computer's voice says the word. As I walked, I turned it on, and a short while later, it started talking. The box said my dad's name, and I said, "What about his name?" The box said, "Honest." "What's he honest about?" "Trees." My dad was a Native American. He was a storyteller, and one of his main talking points was about Mother Earth and how the trees play an important role in life and how we should respect them and honor nature. "Where is Dad's name?" "Come and go." "Why did he come and go?" "To be happy." Being a skeptical believer, I take those boxes with a grain of salt, but I couldn't help but get a tad emotional. I'm going to tell you about my guardian angels. I first heard them when I was 17. I always felt followed, yet never in danger. The first time I heard one speak was while I was walking to work. I just got this job at Burger King in Charleston. I was walking on the sidewalk, all excited because I worked hard to get this job and the money was going to help me and my sister and her kids. Well, as I was walking along the Highway 78, I was not paying attention to the traffic when I heard a voice tell me, "Move over." So I did, but maybe not far enough because I heard her scream, "Move over now!" As I moved further into the grass, a white car flew by me, hitting my left arm below the elbow with its mirror. If I had not moved when I had, the poor lady would have hit me, causing me to go headfirst into a cement wall. I did not have any broken bones or skin, but I did have a really bad bruise. The funny thing about this fact was I needed like $1,500 to get caught up on the bills. The lady's insurance guy showed up a week later with a check for $2,000. I did not keep that job after the accident because I was late that day. My second encounter with my guardian angel happened to me in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. I have really bad diabetes and did not have a doctor or medical coverage to get the drugs I needed to take care of myself. Well, I had gotten my son on the bus for school. At home, it was me and my daughter that was 4 years old at the time. I went and looked in on her as she was still asleep and laid down on my couch taking a nap when I heard a man yell, "Wake up!" After hearing a voice tell me to do something the first time, I learned to listen. I woke up when my daughter was staring at me, scared to death. I then rolled over and started to get up to see smoke coming from her bedroom. When I noticed the smoke, I ran for the phone thinking I should call 911, but as I got to the phone, his voice came through yelling, "Get out now!" I grabbed my daughter and ran outside. When I looked back, the house was fully engulfed in flames. I lost everything, my baby pictures and clothes. I had nothing left to save my daughter and my son, and yes, me as well. I can say if you ever hear a voice telling you to do something, I suggest you listen because I did, and it is why I am alive today. I'm going to go ahead and say that I have never actually seen a spirit, aside from orbs in photographs and on videos. This story is just a series of random events that my mother and I have experienced in her apartment. At one point, I was playing with an Ouija board in my room. I freaked out when the planchette moved by itself and just stopped playing. I was too freaked out to say goodbye, so my pagan friend told me that I may have opened a gate or whatever, and that may explain this stuff. These things all happened shortly after my father died too, so that is a possible theory as well. Another is that someone told me the apartment that my mom lives in were built on what used to be a prison. No matter why these things happened, they did. I don't remember this part as I was just a child, but my mother has told me countless of times that when I was a toddler, just able to walk, she heard me babbling to someone in my baby talk, as she calls it, in the living room. She came out of the kitchen to find that I had somehow managed to open the front entrance door and that I was sitting on the front floor of the doorway, looking up at someone and talking to them, giggling and smiling. When she looked out to see who I was talking to, no one was there. Unnerved by it, she closed and locked the door. If anything else happened after that, I don't remember anything aside from things disappearing and reappearing, but that could have just been forgetfulness. Everything else happened more recently, mostly within the last 3 or 4 years. Now, I like to listen to something at night while I sleep. It makes it easier for me to relax. At my mom's apartment, I had my own personal stereo, which I listened to on my iPad throughout the night. Perhaps my stereo was just possessed, but I remember waking up one night to find that the volume on my stereo was muting and unmuting by itself. The remote was on my nightstand, so there was no way I could have rolled over on it. Plus, when it muted and I tried to unmute it on the remote, it did not work. Another time, around 6 a.m., I was laying awake in my bed, trying to fall back asleep, and just as I was dozing off, the volume on my stereo began to steadily turn up louder and louder by itself until it got so loud I had to turn it off because it was hurting my ears. Once again, the remote was on my nightstand. Another night, around 5 a.m., I was laying awake in bed, just dozing off again, and I suddenly heard a loud sound like something falling. There had been no vibration or anything, so I got up to investigate and found a little square mirror that I used for doing my eyeliner and stuff was laying face up on the floor. I remember because I've never liked looking at my reflection in the dark. It just creeps me out. Since I moved out, my mom has told me stories of picture frames falling in the dead of night as well. I can also recall one time one of my musical toys went off by itself when I was younger. That's pretty much all I remember that's happened to me, but my mother has told me her own stories as well. She told me that one night, while I was out with my boyfriend at the time, she was trying to sleep and she heard a sound like someone opening and closing the refrigerator. Once, she swore she heard me calling for her from my room, but I hadn't called her. Another night, also around 5 a.m., she woke to a very frightening feeling of someone standing next to her bed and staring down at her. She said a prayer to God and forced herself to go back to sleep. When she woke up again later, all was fine. She also had told me many times about seeing shadows coming out of my room during the nighttime bathroom trips, but I had never experienced that, which is probably best. My mother has always been sensitive to the paranormal since childhood. I may post some of her personal stories in the future. I've since moved out of my mother's apartment, but I still go back to spend the night on occasion. I haven't experienced anything during my visits, but sometimes she tells me things that she experiences while I'm away. Nothing major, and neither of us have been harmed, just scared, so I guess everything is okay. I wrote about a year ago about a visit from my father that completely blew my mind. Since then, my house has been a chaotic mess. My two older children, whose bedrooms were upstairs, have now moved downstairs to share a room with my 3-year-old twins. For a 15-year-old girl to choose to share a room with 3 boys tells me that something crazy is going on upstairs. About 9 months ago, I was getting ready for work. My husband and children had left to go to school. My daughter had taken the hairdryer to her room, so I was going upstairs to go and get it. I opened the door to the upstairs, and as I walked up the stairs, I smelt an odor like nothing I'd ever smelt before. It was almost metallic, but not quite. It was very pungent. I thought to myself that I need to tell my daughter to get rid of that particular brand of incense. When I walked into her room, standing by the wall was a tall thing. It was taller than her windows, dressed in what looked like a black cloak, and it turned around when I screamed. I could not move, and it just looked at me. It wasn't a malevolent look, it was more of a blank look. The scariest part was that it was a shiny red color, no hair. I ran, left the house, and went to work without drying my hair at all. The scary part of this was that since my daughter was 2 years old, she had talked about the red man who scared her. She would cry in her bed at night because she said he was looking in her window. I brushed it off then, and she stopped talking about him after her grandmother had passed away. But now, I believe her. When she was 8, my husband and I were getting divorced, and she started talking about him again. She wasn't just talking about him, though. She said there were several spirits who lived in her room. She said her grandmother and father were there. They tried to protect us from the red man. There was a boy about her age who had a skateboard, and he was mean. She said, the red man followed me around and made all the bad things happen to me. And then, after that, he went away for a while. She talked about a time that she and I were driving on the interstate and a van ran us off the road. Our car almost flipped. She said when she looked at the van, the red man was driving, and her grandmother was in the back seat of our car with her, protecting us. Obviously, this scared me. She eventually stopped talking about him and hasn't mentioned him since. I didn't tell her what I saw in her bedroom that day, but she knew and asked me about it. Her room seems to be a hotbed of activity now. Her things get moved around, even while she's in the room, and it had been witnessed by her friends. She was gone for a week this summer and left her room clean. No one went upstairs while she was gone, and when she came back, her room was trashed. Clothes all over the floor, 2 posters were off the wall. My husband is home during the day, and he says he hears things moving around up there all day, footsteps going up and down the stairs. We had to get rid of our dog because he was constantly barking at the door. My children will go upstairs in the daylight, but not after dark. I will not set foot up there at all. My kitchen is the room I fear at night. I can feel someone there, but when I turn on the light, nothing is. I'm afraid to do much more than pray in the house because if my father really is there, I don't want him to leave me. I don't think it's the house, I think it's us, or at least my daughter. She has never been afraid up until recently, and I'm not sure what to do with it. She thinks she is crazy. She spent a week inpatient at a psychiatric hospital due to a psychotic episode and suicidal thoughts. She was hearing voices. She heard people calling her name constantly. I'm starting to think she wasn't psychotic, but hearing spirits who were trying to communicate with her. Even her psychiatrist doesn't think this is schizophrenia. She wasn't medicated before she started hearing it, and even now on medication she hears it. Since then, she has become very involved in our church youth group, and her moods have improved dramatically. But the voices remain. I don't know what I'm looking for. Maybe someone who knows what I am talking about as far as the red man goes. Could he be a demon? Could we get rid of him and leave whoever else is with us alone? We are Christians, and we believe that a demon cannot possess a heart that Jesus inhabits, so I don't believe that we are possessed. Maybe he's just waiting for us to waver. This is an honest-to-goodness true story, and I was hoping I could get some idea of what this thing was or is, so I can finally have some peace. I've never told anyone this, for fear of being called crazy. Please, no wisecracks or jokes. I was 16. I'm 22 now. It was around 6:30 in the morning, and I was getting ready for school. I went downstairs to eat a breakfast sandwich, and I was sitting at the bar stool in the kitchen facing the living room, downstairs bathroom, and downstairs bedroom. I don't know what it was that came over me, but I had the sudden urge to look up. I saw this thing coming out of the bathroom. It was around 4.5 feet, but definitely not 4 feet tall. It was black. I couldn't make out if it was male or female, but I could see a neck, shoulders, arms, and legs. But the thing that scared me the most was the red eyes. They were like this haunting, fiery red from hell. All I know is that when I saw it, I could not move. This thing came out of the restroom and went into the downstairs bedroom. It either did not see me or did not care that I was there, or just plain old was not interested in me. However, the bedroom that I went into was my stepmom's mother's. She was a very mean woman. She had admitted to practicing black arts on people, and whatever that thing was, it went into the room with her. I don't know what the thing was, but I only saw it once, and I still feel its presence. I don't know if I'm really feeling a presence, or if I'm just scared because her mother has died. But why am I still feeling this thing hang around? Or is it her mother? Please, I need real serious answers on what this thing is or was. I need answers. On 2 separate occasions, I have recently seen things. The first thing I saw was on the street around the corner from my street. I was driving and stopped at a stop sign. I looked to the left, and right there, on the side of the road, was a shadow-like figure. It looked like a stick figure with a hooded t-shirt on. It was weird, kind of like a scarecrow, but it was black. I could not believe what I was seeing. My mind thought it was a kid at the bus stop because it was almost 8 a.m. I went through the intersection, but stopped and looked back at it to try and make out what I was seeing. It was still and not moving. Its arms were thin and as black as its shirt. It didn't have hands, no face, just a head that was black with the hood shape. I started to drive off, but then stopped again and tried to make out the legs, which looked like black sticks or somewhat holographic or something. That was about a month ago. Then, just a couple of days ago, when I went to the store at dusk and it had just gotten dark when I left the store, there was a stoplight in the middle of town. At the stoplight, the fire truck went east across the next block. I turned left, which is west. I go 2 blocks and turn right. I'm going back north, and at the first stop sign, across the road, right there, maybe about 10 feet from the corner, on the side of the road but in the road, were two people dressed in black cloaks. For some reason, my car lights weren't doing me any justice. It was like my lights were only shining at the bottom half of them. I tried to drive slow around them and get a good look, but they had pale faces that looked shaped like the "I know what you did last summer" mask, but a little different. I kept thinking maybe kids or teenagers are pranking me, or maybe it's something, but it's not Halloween. They weren't walking, just standing there, looking around, like they didn't know where they were or waiting. The reason that I mentioned the fire truck is because the fire station is just a block away down from where they were. I'd like to know what these things are and why I am seeing them.